Every era of the UFC creates its own heroes, fighters who arrive wrapped in noise, confidence, and belief. They talk about destiny, momentum, and how this is finally their time. Fans buy into the story, media amplifies it, the machine starts to move. But quietly, behind the promotion and the hype, the UFC always keeps one man whose role is very different. He isn't there to inspire. He isn't there to sell dreams. He exists to test them. Justin Gaethje is not the fighter you build legends around. He's the fighter you send legends to when you need the truth. When a name grows too fast. When a persona becomes louder than the substance behind it. When the division needs to know whether someone is real or just entertaining. Gaethje doesn't argue that question with words. He answers it with damage. This is why his presence in the lightweight division has always felt unavoidable. You don't chase Justin Gaethje, you run into him. And when you do, everything you thought you were becomes negotiable. Footwork, confidence, cardio, composure. Nothing stays theoretical for long. Every exchange turns belief into a physical cost. That's why comparisons start to form whenever a new star rises. Fighters like Paddy Pimblett don't ask for that comparison, but they inherit it anyway. Because sooner or later, hype meets reality. And reality in this division has a name. This isn't a story about wins and losses. This is about why the UFC needs someone like Justin Gaethje, and why not everyone is built to survive what he represents. Most fighters enter the UFC trying to become champions. They chase belts, rankings, and legacy. Justin Gaethje was shaped for something else. Long before titles ever entered the conversation, his value to the sport was already clear. He wasn't designed to dominate the division. He was designed to stabilize it. In a sport driven by momentum and perception, the UFC needs fighters who reveal what happens when momentum meets resistance. Gaethje is that resistance. What separates him from most lightweights isn't just power or durability. It's the way his violence functions inside the system. Gaethje doesn't fight to look good on scorecards. He fights to remove comfort. His pressure isn't frantic, it's deliberate. Every step forward forces his opponent to make decisions earlier than they want to. Every low kick isn't thrown for damage alone, but for consequence. Mobility fades, balance changes, reactions slow. And once those layers start to peel away, the fight becomes something very different from what was planned in training camp. This is why Gaethje has always been dangerous to fighters built on rhythm and confidence. His presence interrupts flow. He turns clean combinations into hesitation. He turns swagger into survival. Against him, the fight stops being about expression and becomes about endurance. Can you maintain your identity once the cost of every movement starts adding up? That's the question he forces opponents to answer. From the UFC's perspective, this makes him invaluable. Divisions don't collapse when champions lose. They collapse when illusions go unchallenged. Gaethje acts as a filter. Fighters who can impose themselves on him earn credibility that no promotional push can manufacture. Fighters who can't are exposed not as frauds, but as unfinished. This distinction matters. The UFC doesn't need every star to fail. It needs the system to remain believable. That's why Justin Gaethje keeps getting placed exactly where hype becomes dangerous. Not because he's unbeatable, but because he's honest. He doesn't adjust himself to protect opponents. He doesn't soften his approach to preserve narratives. He forces reality into the cage. And reality, unlike marketing, doesn't care how popular you are. Once the door closes, only preparation, composure, and resilience survive. Everything else disappears under pressure. In most sports, organizations protect their stars by keeping danger at a distance. The UFC works differently. It doesn't eliminate risk, it manages it. And Justin Gaethje is one of the clearest examples of that philosophy in action. He isn't pushed forward blindly, and he isn't hidden either. He's placed with intent. Every matchup tells you something not just about him, but about what the promotion is trying to learn. Gaethje occupies a rare position. He's not treated like a future project, and he's not handled like a fragile asset. He's treated like a stress test. When the UFC wants to know whether a contender can handle sustained pressure, controlled chaos, and cumulative damage, they don't ask hypotheticals. They book Justin Gaethje. Against him, preparation gaps become visible. Fight IQ is exposed. Defensive habits are punished over time, not all at once. This is how the UFC separates excitement from reliability. That's why Gaethje keeps receiving opportunities even after losses. His value isn't defined by perfect records. It's defined by credibility. When someone survives him, beats him, or adapts to him, the result carries weight. It tells the division that this fighter can operate beyond comfort. Conversely, when someone breaks against him, the narrative doesn't collapse. It clarifies. The UFC doesn't lose a star. It gains information. This is also why Gaethje is rarely matched in safe fights. You don't build tune-up bouts around a man whose entire function is consequence. His presence raises the stakes automatically. Media framing may focus on violence, but internally, the calculation is colder. Can this fighter think under stress? Can they make adjustments once their legs slow, their timing slips, and their confidence erodes? Against Gaethje, these questions stop being theoretical. Importantly, this role doesn't require him to be champion. In some ways, it works better when he isn't. Champions defend status. Gaethje tests legitimacy. He sits at the fault line between aspiration and reality, where momentum either hardens into something durable or collapses under pressure. That's why he remains relevant across eras. As styles evolve and personalities change, his function stays the same. The UFC doesn't need him to win every time. It needs him to enforce standards. And as long as the lightweight division produces fighters built on speed, hype, and confidence, there will always be a place for someone whose job is to ask a much harsher question. What happens when all of that gets tired? Every era of the UFC produces fighters who arrive through momentum rather than pressure. They build popularity quickly. They connect with fans. Their confidence becomes part of their appeal. Fighters like Paddy Pimblett represent that side of the sport. They aren't manufactured in laboratories of optimization. They grow organically, fueled by personality, accessibility, and moments that resonate beyond technique. The UFC needs these fighters. They keep the audience emotionally invested. But the system never mistakes popularity for readiness. This is where Justin Gaethje enters the conversation, even when he isn't named directly. He represents the moment when style stops being expressive and becomes functional. Against him, charisma doesn't disappear, but it stops mattering. The fight doesn't reward who feels comfortable being watched. It rewards who can maintain structure once discomfort sets in. This is the line hype fighters eventually have to cross if they want legitimacy rather than attention. The difference isn't talent, it's insulation. Fighters built on hype often operate inside controlled environments early on. Matchups are selected carefully. Risks are introduced gradually. There's nothing wrong with that, it's how stars are grown. But the longer that insulation lasts, the more violent the correction becomes when it finally ends. Gaethje doesn't offer gradual exposure. He offers reality in full weight. From the opening exchanges, the fight becomes less about showing who you are and more about discovering who you are under stress. This doesn't mean hype fighters can't succeed against someone like him. It means the cost of success is higher. They must abandon parts of their identity to survive. Movement slows. Output becomes selective. Mistakes carry consequences that can't be erased between rounds. For fighters whose confidence thrives on rhythm and crowd energy, this shift is destabilizing. The fight becomes quieter, heavier, more internal. From the UFC's perspective, this contrast is useful. It reveals which fighters can transition from entertainers into operators. Gaethje functions as a checkpoint. Passing through him doesn't just elevate rankings, it transforms perception. Fans stop asking whether a fighter is exciting and start asking whether they're durable, adaptable, and reliable. Those are different currencies. This is why comparisons form naturally. Not because the UFC wants to punish rising stars, but because the system demands calibration. Hype without resistance inflates. Resistance without hype stagnates. The division stays healthy only when both collide. Justin Gaethje is where that collision becomes unavoidable. And for fighters built on momentum, meeting him isn't about proving toughness. It's about proving that what made them famous can survive once the noise fades and the fight turns inward. From the outside, Justin Gaethje's fighting style looks like disorder, wild exchanges, forward pressure, a willingness to absorb damage that borders on reckless. But that surface-level chaos hides something far more intentional. What Gaethje practices isn't randomness, it's controlled collapse. He doesn't aim to dominate every second of a fight. He aims to make the structure of the fight degrade faster for his opponent than it does for him. This distinction matters. True chaos overwhelms everyone involved, including the person creating it. Gaethje's version doesn't. His movement patterns are simple. His combinations are compact. His positioning favors inevitability rather than surprise. He accepts short-term damage in exchange for long-term erosion. Each exchange subtly shifts the balance. Breathing changes. Guard positions loosen. Reactions slow just enough to matter. By the time the fight feels desperate, it usually isn't for him, it's for the other man. This is why his approach doesn't translate easily. Many fighters try to imitate the aggression without understanding the restraint underneath it. They swing harder, rush faster, and burn themselves out. Gaethje doesn't chase moments. He manufactures conditions. He knows exactly how much chaos he can survive, and he rarely crosses that line. That's not instinct. That's discipline disguised as violence. Against this kind of pressure, technical excellence alone isn't enough. Fighters who rely on precision need time and space. Gaethje denies both. Fighters who rely on durability eventually discover that toughness has diminishing returns. Pain accumulates, fatigue compounds, confidence erodes in ways that can't be coached away mid-fight. The cage becomes smaller. Options disappear. What remains is decision-making under stress. This is where controlled chaos becomes decisive. Gaethje doesn't need to outthink opponents in the abstract. He forces them to think while hurting. He asks them to solve problems while compromised. And very few fighters can do that consistently. This is why even elite opponents often look less themselves against him. Not because they've forgotten how to fight, but because the conditions no longer favor who they usually are. For the UFC, this style is invaluable. It produces clarity. Fighters leave those bouts changed, regardless of outcome. Some adapt and evolve. Others carry damage that reshapes their trajectory. Either way, the division moves forward with fewer illusions. Gaethje doesn't just win or lose fights. He leaves evidence behind. And in a sport where perception matters as much as performance, evidence is everything. In most divisions, fighters fade when the belt moves on. New champions arrive. New narratives replace the old ones. Justin Gaethje never disappears because his relevance isn't tied to ownership of gold. It's tied to function. As long as the lightweight division continues to produce fast risers, specialists, and personality-driven stars, there will always be a need for someone who enforces reality. Gaethje fills that space naturally, without adjustment. What makes him unusual is that his presence doesn't depend on timing. He doesn't need a perfect win streak to matter. Losses don't remove him from the conversation. They reinforce it, because every fight involving him answers questions the division keeps asking. Can pressure be sustained at the elite level? Can technique survive erosion? Can composure exist once damage becomes unavoidable? Gaethje turns these abstract debates into measurable outcomes. This is why he's often misunderstood. Fans look for arcs: rise, peak, decline. Gaethje operates outside that structure. His career doesn't move in straight lines because his purpose isn't linear. He exists at the intersection of generations. Veterans test themselves against him to confirm relevance. New contenders measure themselves against him to prove legitimacy. The division calibrates around him, whether it acknowledges it or not. There's also a deeper reason he remains necessary. Modern MMA increasingly rewards optimization. Fighters refine systems, minimize risk, and control space. That evolution is natural, but without pressure, optimization becomes fragile. Gaethje introduces friction. He forces systems to operate under imperfect conditions. He reminds the division that fighting isn't just about executing plans, it's about surviving consequences when plans unravel. This is why the UFC never treats him like a gatekeeper in the traditional sense. Gatekeepers block entry. Gaethje doesn't block anyone. He transforms them. Fighters leave bouts with him changed in ways rankings can't capture. Some gain credibility, some lose confidence, some adapt and become more complete. Others never fully recover their rhythm. The impact isn't always visible immediately, but it's always there. In that sense, Justin Gaethje isn't chasing legacy. He's enforcing standards. He represents the part of the sport that refuses to be sanitized, not because it glorifies violence, but because it demands honesty. And as long as the UFC remains a place where belief must eventually collide with consequence, Justin Gaethje will never be optional. Justin Gaethje was never meant to be comfortable. Not for opponents, not for the division, not even for the narratives built around him. He exists in the UFC as a reminder that fighting, at its core, is still about consequence. Plans fail, confidence cracks, styles erode, and when they do, something real is revealed underneath. That's why he doesn't fit neatly into conversations about greatness or legacy. Those debates need clean lines and clear endings. Gaethje operates in the messier space in between. He shows what happens when preparation meets resistance, when belief meets cost, when hype meets structure. Some fighters emerge stronger from that collision, others don't, but none leave unchanged. As the sport continues to evolve faster, smarter, more optimized, the need for friction doesn't disappear. It increases. Someone has to test whether refinement can survive pressure. Someone has to make the cage feel smaller again. Justin Gaethje has done that job for years without asking for permission or protection. So whether he holds gold or not, whether he headlines or anchors a card, his presence still matters. Because every time he walks into the octagon, the UFC isn't just presenting another fight, it's running an experiment. And the results, win or lose, always tell the truth.